So, Stephon Diggs, gone. Jordan Poyer, gone. Micah Hyde, gone. Mitch Morse, gone. Dane Jackson, gone. Trey White, hurt and gone. Gabe Davis, gone. 5 out of your 8 captains, gone. It's a lot of work to do in the offseason for the Bills to, I don't even want to say be in championship contention, be in playoff contention. They lost a lot of snaps from a lot of good players. Mm-hmm. And we said before the offseason even happened, they were going to have to thread a needle to replace a lot of those snaps with quality players, rebuild the roster with youth and with explosiveness to maximize this second, I guess you could say, Josh Allen window, where he's a lot more expensive than he was in the first window. They had the work cut out for him. I'll tell you what, they threaded that needle.
They didn't drop as much as we thought they might. Again, on paper, we'll see how it goes on the field, but on paper, we were expecting something more precipitous. It was not going to be a full teardown rebuild. We never thought it was, but it was a significant retooling, and the line between those two can be pretty thin. As it is, with the work they've done, I think the drop-off's going to be a lot smaller than a lot of people think.
If there even is a drop-off. It's a good team. It's a really good team. I know Bills fans are worried.
Prone to despair.
Oh, yeah. No, Bills fans, definitely a staple bunch all the time. We have a lot to go over today. Schematic changes. Well, really, the schematic changes mostly happened in the middle of last year. What some of their personnel moves tell us about what their scheme might look like this year. We have, a look at their coaching, their front office, everything that happened last year and this offseason, and what we think might happen this year. It's kind of a full, holistic look at the Bills over the last, 8 to 9 months, and then in the future, 6 months. So if you're a Bills fan, buckle up. We got a lot to talk about today. And if you're not a Bills fan, still buckle up. We have a lot to talk about today. So with that, Jay, roll the intro. Welcome back once again to the Bootleg Football Podcast. I'm Brett Coleman. That's EJ Snyder. That's our favorite child. His name's Jameson. Welcome to Buffalo Bills Day. Before we get into 2023 and everything that happened last year in the season from hell that also was the season from heaven momentarily before it became the season from hell again. And then it was heaven and then hell a couple more times and then heaven and then hell again. A little bit more hell, track. Then heaven. It was up and down. It was up and down in true Bills fashion, because they can't just be a normal football team for like a month. No, gotta be weird and Billsy. Before we get into everything that happened in 2023, though, I do want to thank our patron saint for helping to make this show possible. Underdog Fantasy. Obviously, they support the entirety of this show, and this is the biggest series we do every year, because we're traveling, up and down the West Coast and doing it in person, getting spots out here by the water. Some of that does cost money, and Underdog pays us so that we can do this series. So thank you to Underdog for sponsoring us, of course. And if you happen to be fantasy football players yourself and you're eager and you want to start drafting right now, Best Ball is going on right now on Underdog Fantasy, Best Ball Summer. There's $17 million, I think, in prizes available this summer. Or if you like doing pick'ems, doesn't even have to be for football. There's NBA pick'ems, there's baseball, there's hockey. If you're emotionally ready to watch hockey yet, Sabres fans watching this, there's golf. I mean, literally anything you could think of, they have it on Underdog Fantasy. So if you're interested in playing along while you watch sports this entire summer, waiting for football to come back, or if you want to do it during football season, you can find that at the link in the description below or at the QR code on the screen. Promo code BOOTLEG. You'll get a deposit match offer and a Pick'em special offer as well. So thank you to Underdog for making all this happen. And with that, EJ, let's talk about a very weird 2023 for the Buffalo Bills.
We're going to bounce across the top of the waves here. We're not going to get stuck in the troughs because there were a lot of both highs and lows for the Bills in 2023. Overall record 11-6. That does not tell the entire story. Rank in the division first, That was unsure until the very last week of the year. Home record 7-2, Sterling record there. Road record 4-4. Last 5 games. This probably more than any other piece of this tells the story. 5-0. Needed to go on that run because again, you can all do math. 11-6 minus 5 is 6-6. So without the change midseason that we'll talk about at length, this Bills team would have finished very differently, would have been very differently. And I think a lot of the offseason actions that we're going to chronicle in this episode would have been very different as well. We would have seen different players gone, probably more of them, and maybe a more complete teardown if they had not gone on that run. But they really did turn it around the back half of the season. As a result, the 2 stats that we're going to give you, again, summarize the entire year. If we ran them for the first half of the season and the second half, they would look markedly different. And those stats are QBS, which is a new one for us this year. It's quarterback support, statistic I built with Arjun Menon from PFF. Really talks about the total amount of support a team gives its quarterback, and that is offensive measures, defensive measures, special teams, all rolled into one. The scale is 0 to 100. The worst team in the NFL provides a 0 support. The best team in the NFL theoretically provides 100. The Bills were a 77.4 on that 0 to 100 scale. That put them 6th out of 32 teams. Now again, without that last 5 or 6 games, they wouldn't have been anywhere near that. They would have been closer to bottom third, maybe middle of the pack at best. But they did. They put that run together, and as a result, it's kind of like, remember when you were in school and you were failing for 3 of the quarters? Then you really turned it on in that last quarter and passed the final and got a 71 and got your credit?
Oh, I did that routinely.
That was the Bills.
When me and my wife were in high school and we were in chemistry together, I cheated off her like the entire semester because I was like, I'm a film kid. I don't do chemistry. Like balancing equations. What the fuck is this? So I didn't know what I was doing. I cheated off her the entire semester. And I needed an A to pass still because, again, Brett's kind of a dum-dum. And it wasn't that I'm stupid. I mean, I am stupid. But I just really didn't like trying at chemistry because numbers and math is scary. And there's a lot of numbers and math in chemistry. But I had to get an A on this final. And so I studied, and I studied hard. It hurt a lot.
It hurt a lot.
And I got a 95 in the final. Didn't cheat, by the way. Got a 95 in the final. Beat my wife's grade, my now wife's grade.
Yes.
And she looked at me, she's like, whose answers did you get all these from? Was it Shannon? I was like, no. Like, I actually beat Shannon, too. She's like, you did this? And I said, yes. She's like, so you could have been doing this the entire time, and I could have been cheating off you.
Ooh. Turnabout, fair play.
That is the 2023 Bills. They just had to try, EJ. That's all.
That's right.
They're not stupid.
They're not.
They just had to apply themselves.
Never would we call the Bills stupid. So in terms of
sometimes we would.
In terms of QBS, 6th out of 32 teams, the statistic you might be more familiar with, Power Score, that we introduced in this series last year, takes 6 major categories and simply gives them their league rank. It's not any kind of algorithm or anything else. Where did their performance in rushing offense, passing offense, rush defense, pass defense, points scored, and points allowed? What are their league ranks? Take an average of those ranks, and we get their power score. So rushing offense, 2nd. Passing offense, 5th. This was an elite offense. Again, without the last 6-game surge, not the case. Would have been mid-pack. Rush defense, buckle up, Bills fans, 24th. It's never been great. It got a little bit better last year, but only a little bit. And pass defense, 7th. Again, top 10 pass defense in the NFL. That'll get you a long ways. Points scored, not surprisingly, 6th. Points allowed, 4th. They're a very good scoring defense. So you wrap all those together, gives them a power score of 8. Lower is better in power score, just like golf. That gives them the 4th best power score in the NFL. Again, without the last half, wouldn't have been the case. They absolutely would have been mid-pack. But if you look at their QBS, which was 6th, and their power score, which was 4th, those are pretty consistent numbers. Here's the support we gave. Here's the results we got. They match up pretty well. They just did this to get there.
I do want to amend about the offensive EPA numbers, because the Bills are the only team in the entire league where I think what I'm about to say applies.
True unicorns.
Their offense was better in the back half of the year. Their EPA was, believe it or not, worse in the back half of the year. So when we say like, oh, they have the number 2 rushing EPA and the number 5 passing EPA, they were already top 5 in both categories in the first 10 weeks of the season when they were losing a lot.
Yep.
So I think I want to clarify something for people. Their EPA wasn't the issue. It was the fact that even with all of these great EPA numbers, they couldn't score. That was their problem, right? And the Bills are the one team that kind of exposes a slight sort of kind of situational flaw with EPA. Because the Bills are the Bills and they can't just be a normal football team, right? This is the one team where what I'm about to say matters. If you look at stylistically how they succeeded, they were very, very aggressive deep in their own territory because what they really cared about was digging out of holes with explosive plays to flip field position. And if they were they didn't want to die slow. If we're going to die, we're going to die fast.
Big
right?
and fast and make a loud noise.
So their average depth of target was crazy. It was 14 yards or something like that when they were inside their own 20. They got a bunch of chunk plays. And that's how EPA is calculated, is it's, you have a higher expected points added on a drive the closer you are to the end zone. Right, so if you go from being at your own 17 to being at your own 40 on one play, theoretically that's going to have a huge increase in your expected points added for that drive because you're getting a fresh set of downs at basically midfield. You're only 20 yards away from field goal range. That's how EPA works, right?
Yeah, it favors explosive plays.
And that's what they do. They get explosive plays. And so that's why they had super high EPA metrics in the first 10 weeks of the season, but they couldn't score because they kept stalling out. They would get out of their own territory, they would dig themselves out of the holes, but they couldn't finish the job, right? And so I do want to clarify when we talk about, the last 8 game surge or whatever helped them. It actually didn't help them on EPA. It helped them on points. Yeah. So the points scored when they got up to the 6th rank on points scored, a lot of that was because they stopped stalling out, not because
their act together in the second half of the season,
especially in that 50 to opposing 30 range, right? Honestly, they started kicking more field goals. That's the God's honest truth. They started kicking more field goals, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But I just want to clarify with people: the Bills are the one team that EPA kind of lies to you because they're really good at farming EPA. They were really bad at scoring. Yeah. Until they made the OC switch.
And I think all of those numbers are sort of vexing with the Bills because, again, EPA was higher in the beginning of the season. Overall success rate was lower. They weren't finishing. They weren't scoring points when they needed to. If you looked at timing of key points, they couldn't close out games. So their overall effectiveness as a football team in the first half was low. Their EPA was high. Their EPA, as you said, actually leveled out and declined in the second half of the season. But their overall effectiveness as a football team went up. And what you end up with is fairly high marks for a team that didn't spend a lot of time in the first half of the year in fairly high territory.
And I kind of want to dig in a little bit, when we get to the schematic breakdowns, I guess we could say. Okay, well, why weren't they scoring field goals? Or why weren't they getting field goals? Why weren't they finishing drives, everything like that? Again, when we talk about their explosive play rate, it was extremely high and everything like that. But it kind of felt like, not even felt like, it just was. When they got to shot play territory is the best way to describe it, right? If you're just on the opposing 50, if you're in the 35 to 45
I was going to say,
range.
shot play for Josh is anywhere past his own 30.
That's true. I mean, even from zone 5, that's shot play territory for Josh. But anytime they would kind of get into that area where it's almost no man's land, or you're getting into no man's land, where I don't know if we really want to punt here, so we might as well go for it. Or it's like it's a really long field goal, and so you're creating these really tough game management situations, right? Like that area of the field, it can cause a lot of people problems because sure. If you have if you have a kicker that can drill 57-yarders all day, okay, fine, whatever. But if you keep consistently stalling out in that area and forcing your kicker to consistently have to try 50-plus yard field goals, like you're doing nobody any favors. The reason why they kept stalling out there is because, again, they got way overly aggressive in that area of the field, and they kept chucking the ball and chucking the ball and chucking the ball. And when they made the switch at OC from Ken Dorsey to Joe Brady, the switch wasn't that drastic in terms of scheme. It was drastic in terms of play selection. And I mean like run-pass play selection. Mm-hmm. So, again, don't want to throw too many numbers at people, but these are really, really important to illustrate exactly how the EPA went down, but the scoring went up, or at least the situational scoring went up, and the efficiency went up for the Bills in the back half of the year when they started winning all those games. So weeks 1 through 10, that was the Ken Dorsey era, right? They had the 9th lowest early down run percentage between the 50-yard line and the opposing 30, right? So 1st and 10, 2nd and 7, like how often do you run the ball? They had the 9th lowest run percentage. But when they did run the ball, they were the 5th highest in explosive run percentage and the 3rd highest in average yards before contact per attempt, meaning, how much are you essentially moving the defensive line off the line of scrimmage? 2.4 yards. That means the running backs would get 2.4 yards before even getting touched.
Right.
Like they were moving people when they wanted to actually run the ball. In weeks 11 through 18, when Joe Brady came in, that same area of the field, 50-yard line to opposing 30, again, you're kind of getting into no man's land, or you are in no man's land, or you're in deep but still theoretically makeable field goal territory, like that kind of 20-yard area that gives people problems. That's where you finish drives to get into scoring position. Weeks 11 through 18 in that area, they went from the 9th lowest early down run percentage to the 4th highest early down run percentage, and they were still 8th in yards before contact per attempt, so they still had efficiency. They were still moving people off the line of scrimmage. They just did it more, so they were giving themselves more second and manageable. They were giving themselves more 3rd and shorts. They were preventing themselves from getting into like 3rd and 8 holes from the 45-yard line, where it's like you're in punting territory, but you don't feel good about it, and you're not in field goal territory. And again, it was just a pain in the ass to watch this team because they would stall out in that area all the time. Weeks 1 through 10, they went from the 25th most under center runs to the 15th most in weeks 11 through 18. They went from 65% run rate under center with a super high play action rate to an 80% run rate from under center. That was the 4th highest. So they kind of stopped screwing around with, getting under center and then taking play action shots. It's like when they were under center, they just ran the damn ball, right? And they didn't care if it was a tell of like, yeah, we know, we're running it. Like they didn't care about that. It's like, we're running the damn ball when we're under center. And we're not going to keep taking all these play action shots that we're not hitting and stalling out. So they kind of simplified their approach, and they got more physical. They got more intentional with how they ran the ball. They didn't try to do all this like shotgun duo stuff. It was like, we're putting Josh under center. We're running wide zone. We're running inside zone. We're letting James Cook take us to the promised land. And it worked because they started actually getting field goals. They started actually paying off those drives with points. Even if they were getting 3s instead of 7s on some of those drives, they were at least getting something. So their overall scoring went up. The pressure on Josh Allen went down. The pressure on their very injured defense went down. And the team got better not solely, but significantly, because in that crucial area of the field, they just ran the damn ball. And ideally, I think they learned their lesson from that.
Maybe. We'll see. Watching their offense in the first half of the year under Ken Dorsey and then after Joe Brady took over, the thing that sort of made an impression on me is they're working with the same pieces. It wasn't like they had a major return from injury for the most part. They had the same players. They had a lot of the same plays. They didn't completely, throw out the playbook. It was more about selection and about timing. So I equate it to two guys that get the same bag of Legos, right? And Dorsey would build these beautiful things. He'd build beautiful sequences, and they'd have explosive plays, but he didn't link them together, right? So he'd build one, and then the next one, he'd used up all his good blocks, and he would just kind of get to 3rd and 8 and, either have a run from shotgun that didn't have the angle or throw a pass that was very low percentage, and it would die out. So there were these breaks, right? Beautiful thing, break, beautiful thing, break, and there was just no consistency. And Brady took those very same pieces and sort of, remixed them and went, okay, we're going to do very solid thing, maybe not explosive thing, but we're going to be in 3rd and short, and then we're going to do very solid thing again, and then we get to do it again, right? There's no break. And you got this consistency where they started to extend drives regularly, where it was like, oh, gorgeous thing, big gap. Oh, gorgeous thing. Why can't they just do the gorgeous thing all the time? But they can't. It's like use up your good pieces, and then Dorsey couldn't find ways to knit it together. And Brady took that, and I don't want to say dumbed it down because that's not, he sort of simplified it and said, all right, we're going to put ourselves in better situations more often. We're going to play the numbers game. Right? We're going to take those low percentage pieces out. And by doing that, in turn, we're going to need the high percentage pieces to hit less. So when we do, we're going to get more points. And it just sort of made this continuum with the same parts that was really impressive.
It was Game of Thrones versus Breaking Bad. Just go with me on this.
Okay.
Extremely well written.
Okay.
Like, best show on TV. Everything's amazing. We're watching it. We're enjoying it. Everything makes sense. Everything's woven together. Everything feels pre-planned and organized. Breaking Bad stuck the landing. Game of Thrones didn't. And I think Joe Brady kept sticking the landing.
Oh, he did.
Ken Dorsey couldn't stick the landing. It felt great. It was awesome. It looked awesome.
Looked awesome in parts.
Tons of fun moments.
And then you'd get there and you're like, major plot hole.
Yeah. You get to the 45-yard line. Ah, fuck. Here comes season 8.
Yeah.
Like, I'm telling you, that's what it was. I can't even remember where we're at. So I'm just going to go into defensive scheme.
There you go.
What people are dying to hear about, of course. Did you know the Bills were in nickel 80% of the time last year? And they were in dime another like 10% of the time.
And it went up from there.
Now they lost, I don't know,
all
their linebackers. So like they lost all their linebackers, so they're not going to play base a lot. And
secondary was pretty injured as well.
Actually, yeah, the secondary might have been even more injured than the linebackers. They were just injured in general. I want to touch on that.
Yeah.
The fact that this team was 6-6 and made the playoffs, despite being so incredibly injured. We give Sean McDermott a lot of shit, but
highly
he coached
improbable.
his ass off, man.
Yeah. If you look at, again, the resources available, back to the sort of Lego analogy, and you project out and go, okay, you're going to build something great and win the prize at 6-6 with all the injuries and with the spotty play and a coaching change midseason. Let's just talk about that. I mean, we've talked about Ken Dorsey and Joe Brady specifically, but typically coaching changes midseason in the NFL are not good business.
Yeah.
They're stabilizing the ship at best, but you don't tend to get a lot better. You might not continue being worse, but it's not cause for improvement because, again, people will tell you it's very hard to sort of change tracks in the middle of the year and have any significant improvement. The Bills did. It's not a likely story, and it is a great coaching job.
And I just don't think he got enough credit for it. You know, taking on double duty as a defensive play caller and being a head coach and dealing with all those injuries.
I'll give him half credit for the taking on double duty because he put that on himself.
Yeah, it was kind of his own fault. But, again, in true Bills fashion, he was in a hole.
Let's pick the hardest way possible.
But he did dig himself out of that hole.
And they won.
He put himself in the hole, but he dug himself out of the hole.
So does the credit even out? Anyways, I can't keep up with the math.
It's Bills, man.
Can't keep up with the math. That's the Buffalo Bills. I can't keep up with the math. It's a great t-shirt.
Even Bills fans can't keep up with the math. That's why they jump through tables, because hopefully, like their end goal is, all right, I'm going to get so concussed in the pregame that I'm not going to remember anything that I watch for the next 3.5 hours, and I'll check the score tomorrow.
Or, the Buffalo Bills. I was told there would be no math.
Yes, Ken Dorsey every single week. Wait, we're on the 47. It's 1st and 10.
Slide rule.
4 verts? 4 vert? I think that's what the chart says, guys.
Go for it.
All right, speaking of Sean McDermott, by the way, we do genuinely really like this front office and coaching staff. They have a lot of really good coaches.
Yeah.
A lot of continuity other than, the OC switch, but a lot of continuity in that building. Take us through front office and the coaches for the Buffalo Bills.
Brandon Beane at GM has done a tremendous job since taking over, has really rebuilt the organization from a roster perspective. He's been there a while now, and it doesn't resemble at all the way they were operating before he got there. And Bills fans' expectations, I think, are an echo of that. The fact that, they were 11-6, they were first in the division, they made the playoff, and they're still disappointed. They're used to a level of success at this point that Brandon Beane has built through roster revamping and good drafting that wasn't where they came from. Let's just put it at that. So Brandon Beane also deserves a huge helping of credit. Sean McDermott heading into year 8 at this point. Again, gets a lot of garbage, but it's, I think, garbage based on expectation. I'm expecting you to be first in the division. I'm expecting you to make the playoffs. I'm expecting you a couple of years ago to win the Super Bowl. Those are very high expectations, and it's very hard to meet those. Only one team every year wins the Super Bowl.
Kansas City.
Sean McDermott has, and we just
lost all the Bills fans. Now they're gone.
Sean McDermott has been very consistent in keeping the Bills not just competitive, but at the top of their division once they got there. And I agree, that's a new thing for them, but not every coach can get you there, and especially not with all the situations that we just talked about, midseason coaching changes, injuries, not meeting expectations the year before, which crushes a lot of teams by itself. That pairing seems to have very similar vision, and the Bills are reaping the benefits of that. So love the top coordinators. Joe Brady, talked about him in the switch. The defensive coordinator is Bobby Babich, and I'm old enough to remember when his dad, Bob Babich, was Brian Urlacher's linebacker coach in Chicago.
Family business.
So when I see Bobby, I'm like, wait, Bobby, not Bob. Oh, little Bobby? Anyways,
Bob Jr.?
Yeah.
Bob the second?
Not really sure how that goes, but he is the current DC. Again, last year, McDermott notably was the DC after Leslie Frazier moved on. He just sort of kept that reign. At this point, seems as though they're going to designate Bobby as the guy to do that. I'm sure McDermott will still have, hands in the defense. That is where he comes from. Special teams coordinator, Matthew Smiley. Notable coaches on offense, Aaron Cromer for the offensive line. Again, came from Bears stint, but he's coached all over the NFL, and he is a good developer of offensive line. You talked about their ability to run the ball, to move people off. Like, that is an influence of Aaron Cromer and molding that offensive line unit. So deserves credit there. Rob Boris, the tight ends coach, he's been doing it for a very long time. And notably, we want to call out coaches for very strong position groups in the NFL. Bills tight end room.
Pretty darn good.
Pretty darn strong.
I mean, it helps when you draft Dalton Kincaid, but still.
And
before
Dawson
that.
Knox. But again, Dawson Knox wasn't the Dawson Knox we know now before he got to the Bills. Part of that is due to Rob Boris' coaching. And Ronald Curry is the QB coach. I always like bringing up Ronald Curry because he himself was a quarterback at UNC, but he was also a point guard on the basketball team.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
A two-sport athlete, much like one Julius Peppers at UNC.
Well, Julius was slightly more athletic, I would say.
Yeah.
Just a little bit. Just a hair.
Ronald Curry was a very high recruit, held his own, but now in charge of coaching Josh Allen, a pretty enviable task in the NFL. Defense, special teams. Scott Booker I call out because his title is nickel/senior defensive assistant. This is something we saw start popping up in the league about 2 years ago. Guys designated not as a safeties coach or a defensive backs or cornerbacks coach, but specifically as a nickel coach. And I think that's warranted because it's a very difficult role that has, I don't want to say a unique set of requirements, but a very specialized set of requirements that require that you teach them very specifically, because nickel players are functioned going really in all four directions. You've got a two-way break on every route. You've got to be in the run fit. It's not just like, oh, well, he's not big enough to play outside, so he's a nickel. And I think...
Yeah, tell Teron Johnson he's not big enough.
Yeah.
Whoop your ass.
It's the guy pretty much you want at nickel.
He's the angriest dude on the team.
That's right. And having a coach that is specialized to serve that role, serve those needs, and coach that very important role. As you said, they were in nickel a vast majority of the time. So it being the new base, we see that reflected in these titles. Al Holcomb, linebackers coach. Again, linebackers for the Bills have been very successful. Again, we saw that even with the injury last year, some of the young guys stepping up and a lot of people being like, well, we're going to see a drop-off. And the linebackers played their ass off last year, so all credit to Al Holcomb. Prior to coming to Buffalo, spent 3 seasons with the Panthers. He also was a member of the Super Bowl champion Giants as a defensive assistant to the team, and also coached in Super Bowl 50 as the Panthers LB coach. So he's coached in a couple of Super Bowls. He knows of what he speaks in that term, and he has a very talented unit to work with in Buffalo.
You know, seeing the development of Terrell Bernard, seeing the development of Matt Milano, that's what really gives me a lot of, what's the word, hype? I guess hype is probably the
sure.
The
You'd be hyped about it.
For Edefon Ulufosio, their 5th rounder. And we'll get to him in a little bit.
We'll get
but
to
like,
him.
Folks, he was my LB3 in this class. And he's going to a really, really good developer of linebacker. Really, the whole staff is a good developer of linebackers. But other than their division rival, the Jets, there's very few staffs that I would trust to develop linebackers of this body type, you know, like the roughly 230-ish pounders, right, that have range and, you know, they can play the run, they can blitz, they can cover, especially cover when it comes to Ulufosio and Milano and Bernard. Like, there's very few staffs I think I would trust over the Bills to get the most out of him. So, like, I think a guy like Ulufosio, he'll succeed because he's in Buffalo. It's not that he'll succeed only because he's in Buffalo, but I think his ceiling in Buffalo is higher than it is in most other places because of the staff they have here.
No, I would completely agree. We'll talk about him when we get to the draft, which we liked, but there are always those players, and it really starts at the top with the sort of Bean and McDermott handshake or the GM and coach handshake at whichever team going, no, these are the types of players we need. And that's not as simple as saying we need 230-pound linebackers that can cover. I mean, you need a mental makeup. You need a fit within the team. You need certain skills within those skills. And the tighter that handshake is, the more complete that understanding is, the more likely you are to get the raw materials. And then on top of that, when you pair it with a coaching staff that knows what to do with it, you see these, I don't want to call them success stories, these sort of down the board players that people had lower expectations for that outplay those expectations more regularly. And it is a combination of all three of those elements.
So now we got through the coaching staff, the front office, the schematic, you know, switcheroo that they did in the middle of last year that we think is going to carry over to this year. You know, all that information. And how do we act upon that information? So this is a little segment we call the Underdog Top 3, which is where we try to find the top 3 values on the Buffalo Bills as it relates to fantasy football. Because I know most of the people listening to this probably play fantasy. Some of you probably even play a lot of best ball. Some of you might even be drafting in best ball right now. So when you look at the Buffalo Bills, things look a lot different this year because no Stephon Diggs, no Gabe Davis. You know, a lot of the mainstays that people would draft very early on to, you know, be the guy who catches passes from Josh Allen, they're gone. And so there's been kind of a scramble, you know, to figure out where are those targets going to go. If we're looking at ADPs right now, Dalton Kincaid's going off the board as the TE4. So everybody seems to think like, okay, well, Dalton Kincaid's just going to be the new number 1 now, right? This is going to be a Travis Kelce type situation where he's the number 1, and then you got a whole bunch of other guys that are going to, you know, be complementary pieces. And that may be true. Like Dalton Kincaid might lead them in targets.
That may be true.
However, this has caused a depression in the value of all their actual wide receivers. Khalil Shakir, who's a favorite of mine, championing the Khalil Shakir fan club. We're finally here, folks. We finally made it.
There are tens of you.
Literally dozens of us, okay? Most of them live in Western New York. But we're here. He's going to be a factor in this offense, and he's going as wide receiver 54. Keon Coleman, and to be honest, Keon's value might spike significantly over the next couple months. He's going as wide receiver 70 right now. These are probably two of their top 3 receivers this year, and they're going as wide receiver 5s in most leagues. They're going as wide receiver, what was this, 8? Keon Coleman would be like a wide receiver 8 for somebody, if he's wide receiver 70 overall. If my math is right. Again, we established earlier on I'm not a math guy. But what I'm saying is, if you're going to get discounts in this Bills passing game, which everybody should want a piece of the Bills passing game, you're not getting it with Dalton Kincaid. If you want to draft him early, fine, do that.
Right.
But if you just want value, it's Khalil Shakir, it's Keon Coleman. Agree or disagree?
I really agree with the Keon Coleman piece. And somebody we both know from Buffalo reached out to me, as folks often do, and like, hey, I'm drafting my dynasty team, or I'm redrafting this fantasy team. What do I do here? And they're trying not to be homers. And I said, look, at the end of the conversation, I said, look, I know it's going to be considered homerish a little bit, but look at the receiving core. Like, if you think Keon Coleman's not getting targets, and it would be one thing if they'd lost Gabe or Stephon, but they didn't.
They lost both of them.
They lost both of them.
Yeah.
So it's like Khalil Shakir is now one of the senior members of this receiving team, which seems kind of crazy. If you think a highly drafted, very talented wide receiver like Keon Coleman's not going to get a bunch of targets, yes, he's going to have his rookie struggles. He's going to have to learn how to beat pro coverage. He's going to have to do all that stuff. He is still a big, talented football player that can win. And as long as he establishes that relationship with Josh, he's getting a bunch of targets. And I was like, so it's kind of homerish, but it's hard to say he's not going to get fed, because who else is the ball going to? Yes, Dalton Kincaid is the de facto number 1. Should be. And if you want to draft him, go for it. Big Dalton Kincaid fan. He's going to pay that off. But then what is the question? And if you don't look squarely at Keon Coleman, even over above your favorite, the now veteran Khalil Shakir, you're kind of missing out. Like, that's the reason they drafted him. He's custom made for the role. Everybody in that organization is going to be like, dude, like, go get it done. We're going to throw the ball to you. So
you also have to look at roles, right? Because Khalil is more of a slot/Z receiver type.
Correct.
Curtis Samuel, he's not an X. They brought in Mac Hollins. Like, yes, he can play X, but I still feel like we haven't seen the best of Mac Hollins, but we're on year whatever it is now.
We did for 1 year.
I don't know if we're ever going to see it, right?
1 year with the Raiders, we saw the best of Mac Hollins. Whether he'll ever, approach that again, and again, this might be the best chance he's got, but he's not your X.
No, and neither is Chase Claypool, neither is Marquez Valdez-Scantling. So it's like, who else are they going to put at X? It's got to be Keon. And even
He's
and I
have every chance to win that job.
100%. And he's probably in the lead to win that job. And you and I didn't even think like he profiled best as an X in the draft. Like we kind of saw him as like yes, he can do it, but his best role is probably a big slot. Well, they have a million slot receivers on this team. He's not going to play the slot for them. They don't need him to.
Nope.
But they need him to play X. Somebody's got to do it. So he's probably it. So if you're trying to find somebody who's going to get targets,
yeah, need meets value.
Yeah, like he's it. Our third in the underdog top 3, by the way, is James Cook. He's going off the board at RB12. That it's so crazy because I didn't think I would be saying this a year later, but I almost feel like that might be a little low because I think they're going to keep. They're going to understand what buttered their bread in the back half of last year, which was running the ball. I think they get that. I think they're going to continue doing that. And James Cook seemed to be the beneficiary of that. He still does have Ty Johnson in that backfield. They did take Ray Davis in the 4th round. They still got Darrington Evans, but like none of those guys to me makes me concerned about taking a lot of touches off James Cook.
No, he really blossomed last year overall as a player. And I want to give a shout out to Jordan Reed, our buddy who's been on the show, works for ESPN. Occasionally I'll reach out to other analysts after I've watched somebody and be like, I'm either like way higher or way lower, I think, than consensus. I feel like I am. What do you see about this player that I don't see? Because I knew that he was a big James Cook fan. So I reached out to Jordan. I said, all right, man, 3 bullet points. Sell me on James Cook because I'm not there. I don't think he is a bad player, but I think a lot of people have him much higher on their board than I do on mine. Tell me why he's higher on your board, right? And we do this with each other. This is something that goes around in the community. And Jordan made a very impassioned plea for what he thought James Cook could be in his best self. And honestly, that version that he sort of painted is what James Cook morphed into last year in Buffalo. It was his best case scenario in a lot of ways. So all credit to Jordan. He's fantastic at what he does. He was absolutely right about James Cook. I was lukewarm. He was red hot on James Cook, and it worked out. Like, he went to the right situation. He got the opportunity, and he fully seized that opportunity throughout last year. I was really impressed by all the things that he did better than I thought he could do, or did that I thought that he could not do. He was really a much more fully featured runner.
He's more well-rounded than he was in college.
Yeah, right? 100%. And like Jordan saw that very clearly, saw that ability. Again, we go back to that very classic. Is it because he wasn't asked to or because he can't? And
well, at Georgia, I think it's because he can't. But then he got to Buffalo, and I think they truly did refine his game.
He was tremendous as an all-around back. He did the things well that had him solidly on my board in a good spot, and then did all the other things that I thought he was weaker at very well. And it was really eye-opening to me. It was like, okay, that would be worth, what people were saying he was going to be at. So sometimes we just don't see it. Again, we want all those guys to succeed. We want that to happen for every player. We're fully aware that it won't, but that makes for the best football, and it made for some really good Bills football.
To specify for people, by the way, like what my concerns, and I'm not going to speak for EJ on this, but what my concerns about James Cook when he was coming out of Georgia was, okay, I see the receiving chops, and when they were running GT counter with him, and they're basically part in the Red Sea, he's got the juice to pay it off. He's a great threat to the edge. But when they had to run inside zone, when they ran power, when they ran anything where he had to really, kind of get in the dirt and the grime and sift through traffic and kind of pay his own way, he wasn't good at that at Georgia. And so I was like, I don't know, maybe he's a complimentary piece in the NFL. Gets to Buffalo, and he kind of was that to start out, right? But he developed.
Yeah.
Like if you look at the back half of last year, like they were banging him in between the tackles. Oh boy, might have to rephrase that one. They were
running
him in between the tackles, and he was paying it off, man. He was No
way to recover. No way to recover.
I'm gonna blame Jameson on that one.
Okay, fair enough.
But he got better as a player. A lot better.
Absolutely. And showed again skills. I'm with you that some of his best highlights at Georgia were like, yeah, but I have one leg and I could run through that hole.
Yeah.
That was 6 yards wide. And yeah, he's got great speed and nobody touched him. We talked about, average depth before contact for running backs. There were runs at Georgia, a bunch of them on his highlight film. Nobody touched him for like 45 yards. Like, he was untouched for 50 yards. I'm like, well, that doesn't show me a lot. It shows me he's fast, and he could hit a really wide hole that he's never going to see in the NFL. What is that? And it was that ability to pick and choose, to grind a little bit when he needed to get some tougher yards. Not that he wasn't strong or tough or anything else. It was just harder for me to make that connection and say, can he do that consistently? And he really grew into that role, and that's what made him valuable all around. And he didn't lose anything else. He was still a very dangerous receiving back. Still could make people miss in space on the perimeter, which were all the things that made me like him, but also feel like you did, maybe he's more complimentary. I really don't see him being the number one. There's really no such thing as a bell cow anymore, but I don't even really see him being number one. I see him being more of a complimentary back, and then he grew into a number one.
And now we're here.
And now we're here.
And now he's going as RB12, and I'm like, well, that might be a little bit light. like he might be better than
Especially with that receiving core, because they're going to have to lean on him more. So
yeah, fun player. That's why I think the Bills, like, are they in a championship contention window if we're weighing the youth of this roster and you know them losing a bunch of their captains, like, are they in a championship contention window relative to where Baltimore's at right now, relative to where Kansas? It's tough for me to say yes, but like, this is a playoff team. They're good. They have a lot of talent. Like, James Cook is a good player. Khalil Shakir is a good player. Keon Coleman, we think, is going to be a good player. They have offensive linemen. They have pass rushers. They have linebackers. Like, they got guys.
Yep.
They're good.
You know, I think when I look at that window specifically, and you and I have had a bunch of conversations about this window for Buffalo, and you talk about a playoff, you know, contention or a championship contention window, which really is moves the notches up higher on the window. Are they in that window? Yes, I think they still are. And a lot of people,
championship contention.
Yeah, and a lot of people thought they were going to fall out. Now, are they at the top? Right? Are they an expected, the place they were in 2 years ago, where people were expecting them to get to the Final Four?
Where it's like, you better win it this year.
Right, exactly. Are they at that notch of the window, sort of the high end of the window? No. Are they still in the window? They are. They're farther down. They're going to have more breaks go their way or whatever else. But I'm with you. It's not going to be like some crazy Cinderella story. And a lot of people thought they were going to fall completely out of that window, especially when, you know, basically we're going to go into their losses. They got rid of a bunch of their secondary, a lot of familiar faces. Their top two receiving threats from the wide receiver core gone. A lot of youth. Like, people were like, oh, okay, we're falling all the way out of that window. And I feel like, we'll talk about that. I feel like they slid down in the window, and their chances are lighter, but not, I really don't think they're outside that window.
Plus, they still got the best quarterback in the division.
Always a factor.
And they got one of the 5 best quarterbacks in the NFL.
And that will always keep you close. If that's the only thing, then your chances are really small and you're right down at the bottom of the window. I feel like they're, you know, substantively above that.
Well, why don't we, you know, stop beating around the bush and talk about all these losses? Because it's a lot of big names, and there's no way around it.
Changes in Buffalo.
Yeah, like, I'm talking structural changes, cultural changes.
Captain changes.
It's going to be a new group, man.
Yeah, completely. Got to start with Micah Hyde. Shout out to my Aunt I in Buffalo. Micah Hyde was her favorite player. I know this one hurts. You know, 74% of the snaps, and that was largely only because of injury. He was very much closer to 100% snap guy when he was healthy. Has been really a fixture in the Buffalo secondary for a while, and not an easy loss to overcome. Shaq Lawson, you know, was in that rotation for them. Again, kind of a guy they picked up on more of a mercenary contract, but did play almost 30% of the snaps. Leonard Floyd, again, came over as a rotational guy, played more than 50% of their snaps, and really, I think, filled a role in that defense that a lot of other edges in that defense can't play, in terms of having the athletic length to play coverage. They tend to get stronger, taller, more long arm power rushers that aren't guys that you're going to drop. Floyd, you could do both with. Ryan Bates goes away in a trade. Again, he didn't play a ton for the Bills, but
Ryan Poles finally got his man.
Yes. Took him a while.
Poles have been trying for years to get him, man.
Indeed. Jordan Poyer, the other half of the secondary tandem, or the safety tandem, that really has defined the Buffalo secondary for the last 5 years. 92% of the snaps. Ends up with division rival Dolphins.
Did you see what he said this week, by the way?
I did not.
So, again.
And that might have been purposeful.
Newly minted Miami Dolphin, Jordan Poyer, did the exact opposite of Tyreek Hill. Where Tyreek, you know, he's in Kansas City, goes to Miami, immediately, like, Tua throws the best ball I've ever caught.
Yeah.
Tua's amazing. We love Tua. Tua. Jordan Poyer is in Miami. He's like, oh, no, Josh Allen's the best quarterback in the league. It's like, Jordan, did you get the script? You're in Miami now. Tua.
Did not get the script. Jordan's looking at two of them and going, I'm just going to call it how I see it.
He's not wrong.
No. The other Jordan Phillips, interior defensive lineman, goes to the Giants. Only played 36% of the snaps, but they're a very particular 36%. They're going to be difficult to replace. Mitch Morse, longtime center for the Bills, 97% of the snaps, ends up going to the Jaguars. Another big loss. We talk about how underrated center is, especially in the run game.
And when they're a captain.
Yep. So you keep going. Gabe Davis, the wide receiver, also went to the Jaguars, 83% of the snaps. Dane Jackson, first guy we ever interviewed together for Bootleg. So pour one out for, well, not that, but pour one out for Dane Jackson. One of our favorite players goes to the Panthers. And Stephon Diggs, can't not talk about it, ends up trade going to the Texans, 81%. Has been their go-to guy, has been that absolute alpha. We can say what we want about Gabe Davis. He never ascended to that role. That was Stephon's role. It was clearly defined. 3rd and 7, we need to throw the ball at somebody, and they need to catch it. It is going to be Stephon Diggs. That's going to be difficult to replace. We'll talk about Keon in the draft and everything else, but that's not a characteristic that comes with all receivers. Not even all ex-receivers have it. Stephon had it. He wanted the ball in that situation desperately, and he was most likely going to win it. You can talk about declining skills over the past year and a half.
Oh, hell, even just the past 9 games. Like, he was starting off the year on a tear.
Yeah.
And then nothing.
Yeah.
Right.
And he'll hear none of it, but it's part of the reason that he's ended up in Houston and that it's a new day for Buffalo. That's a lot of losses. That's a lot of veteran leaders. That's a lot of snaps. That's a lot of experience. And it's one of the reasons that I think Bills fans kind of like have been sheltering in place this offseason, being like, oh, who's next? Because it is a lot of change. And I'm here to say it'll be all right. I know it's a lot, but it'll be all right.
I want to touch on the Diggs thing because I feel like really it's the Diggs and the Davis thing.
Yeah.
Because I feel like when they let both of them, well, not let, I mean, they traded Stephon, but, you know, when they let Gabe walk out the building, when they traded Stephon, I feel like that was a declaration of their new identity, which is the identity that, again, they were building over the back half of the season,
right.
Which is we're going to be really good at situationally running the ball. Like we're gonna let James Cook, you know, take pressure off of Josh.
I
had to at least once. I had to at least once. I'm not even a dad yet. I'm practicing my skills, right?
Dude. You're on your way.
But it's not going to be as much Josh Allen bombing it down the field. No. It's going to be we're running the ball. We're going to move the chains consistently with our 8 slot receivers of varying dimensions.
We're not even going 4 verts. We're going 8 verts.
No, just stick routes all day, all sticks, all the time, with like one choice from James Cook. You know, once or twice a game, we'll have Keon Coleman do something like crazy physics defying as he does.
As one does.
And then we'll go back to running the ball.
Yeah.
We'll score points. We'll have long sustained drives. We'll let our great defense that is still great and well coached, you know, do their thing, and we'll win a bunch of games.
And then we'll all go eat wings.
Yeah, Bar Bill, by the way. That's our allegiance. Bar Bill.
For sure.
Honey butter Cajun barbecue. Still the best wing I've ever had in my life.
Not arguing.
God, we got to go back to Buffalo.
It's funny. You start talking about wings and you're like,
Dude, I still think about those wings, man.
They're great.
They're amazing. Anyway, that's their identity.
Yes.
Run the ball, high percentage completions.
Just to be clear, garbage plates are not their identity.
I mean, kinda. Kinda
not far
is.
from the truth.
But I think that them, you know, getting rid of Stephon and Gabe was a transition away from deep posts our identity, and I think they're moving more towards a, dare I say, Chiefs-ish style offense from the last couple of years, right?
You were thinking that there are 3 surviving Bills fans on this podcast, and you
gone
want to drive
now.
them off?
We got them back with Bar Bill. Then they heard Chiefs and were like, fuck you guys.
What? Why did I come back? Why do I keep believing in this team?
It actually is kind of interesting how the Chiefs and the Bills are almost swapping places, because the Chiefs were very much like easy.
They're basically a year
completions.
behind, or a year or 2 behind in terms of the cycle. I'm not saying behind in development or anything else. It's like this happened to the Chiefs a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And it's now happening to Buffalo. And again, it has to do with quarterback contracts, when they get paid, how teams have to allocate those resources. And it's just like, oh, you're going to get there.
But the same thing happened, which is like we have Tyreek, you know, we have all this speed, we have Mecole Hardman, we're going to throw it down the field and throw it down the field. And throw
I'm
it
not
down the
arguing.
field. And then once they got off of that style, they win back-to-back rings by playing good defense, by being efficient in the passing game and emphasizing more completions and just moving the ball forward than trying to get explosive plays. And if we do get explosive plays, a lot of them are going to be after the catch. And I think that's kind of what the Bills are moving towards.
Yeah, and when we force Pat to play hero ball, it doesn't work as well.
He can do it 4 to 5 times a game.
That's right, same as Josh.
But that's all we need him to do. Like I'm telling you, the Bills looked at what KC was doing, and it's like, we don't have to throw it 40 yards down the field. Let's just get completions. Let's play defense. And again, a half dozen times a game at most, we'll let our alien quarterback be an alien.
Yeah,
but we're not going to do it 12 times a game.
No, we shouldn't either, because it doesn't put him or us in the best position for success. And it is interesting to watch the evolution, because this is an evolution of this team. It is going in a different direction, not a worse direction, anything else, but it is there are different points of emphasis, and that requires different players, and that's what this is indicative of.
When we look at retentions and also outside free agents acquired, Deion Dawkins is back, Dawson Knox is back, Teron Johnson is back, Daquan Jones is back, AJ Ebenesa is back. So there still are a bunch of core players that are still there. Right. So it's not like they lost everybody. There's still a bunch of really key pieces that are in the building. Like, they could not afford to lose Teron Johnson. Happy that he's still up in Buffalo. They definitely couldn't afford to lose Deion, and they probably will never be able to afford to lose Deion. So happy he's there. In terms of third-party additions, they brought in MVS. Quite honestly, I don't care. Like, I really don't care.
I know people are debating whether or not it's going to be a factor and where he came from and everything else. I'm with you. I think this is, I don't want to say a depth signing, but it really is. It's like a depth signing.
If he catches nothing in the regular season, it will not move me at all, because I know he's literally just there for January. That's the only time MVS matters, is in January. Like, he's going to drop everything, and he's going to infuriate you in the first 4 months of the season. Then you get to January, and he's going to have the best hands you've ever seen, and he's going to get crazy clutch explosive plays, and it's like, oh my God, thank God we signed MVS. But for the first 4 months of the year, like, I don't care. They also brought in Curtis Samuel, another one of their gaggle of slot receivers.
I was going to say yet another one.
They're never going to have enough. Mac Hollins, we mentioned, they brought in. DeJuan Smoot, they brought in after, 8 years in Jacksonville, something like that. He was there forever.
Yeah, underrated for almost all that
Very
time.
underrated as like a rotational edge piece for them. Deion Jones, he's still kicking around. They brought him in. And Mitch Trubisky, back in Buffalo.
I had to highlight Mitch Trubisky, not because of Bears allegiance, but because Brandon Beane put his money where his mouth is. Do you remember what Brandon Beane said about Mitch after his year in Buffalo?
Something about him letting him date his daughter.
That's right. I would let that guy marry my daughter.
Did he actually marry Brandon Beane's daughter?
No, he did not.
I was like,
he did not.
Is that what happened?
That's the kind of hyperbole that a general manager says when he wants to be good to a dude that he brought in, and he wants him to get another job, right? But once he does, usually they're like, okay, don't have to do that again, right? Actually re-signs him to come back up, Josh Allen, and sort of welcome him back into the Bills fold. It doesn't happen all that often. Like, those kind of second chances don't get turned around, and it typically doesn't happen when there's that kind of like butter me up, sort of smarmy goodbye, right? Where it's like, I'm just trying to help you get your next job. But then a chance to resign him, like, no.
He actually did help him get his next job. Like, he put him in a place where he could have legitimately competed to start.
I fully understand. I'm just saying this is a rarity, and that's why I highlighted Mitch Trubisky, not because I think he's, is going to have a tremendously large impact to the Bills' futures, but it's like, this doesn't happen all that often, folks, and Brandon Beane made good on that.
And let's be honest, when your quarterback is Josh Allen, the backup to Josh Allen isn't somebody that you need to start. It's somebody who's good in the room with Josh. Somebody who's going to be good at helping Josh prepare. And that's what Mitch is. Like, he's buddies with Josh, and he's going to be good for him in the room. Like, that's the dynamic of that type of quarterback room. When you have an elite guy, like, you're not bringing somebody in that you're expecting to start. You're bringing somebody in who's going to help the quarterback coach get Josh ready. And that's what Mitch is going to do. All right, that brings us to the draft. The youngins.
Yep.
that they brought in to replenish this roster after all the losses. Honestly, I love it. Like pretty much every single pick I loved. There were a couple where I was like, it's a little early, but none that I outright hated. And especially when you get into the day 3 picks, Brandon Beane cleaned up here.
Top to bottom, it's a very strong effort. We've talked a lot about Keon Coleman, the big wide receiver out of Florida State. They get him in the second round at pick 33. Again, just out of the first round. A lot of people thought of him as a first rounder. Again, we didn't think of him as a traditional X. He might end up being that in Buffalo, largely through the absence of another non-slot receiver that could fill that role. I think he's going to be successful. Gotta say, was not aware of Keon's personality, of which there is a lot, and I love it.
I wish I knew before, man.
Exactly.
Like, I would have been like, please, for love of God, Texans take him at 23. Yeah. Him and CJ together would be great.
Put him a couple of slots up. A tremendous interview. Their second pick, Cole Bishop, might be my favorite pick of the entire draft. Safety out of Utah. Love the fact that they had to hit this, right? When you let Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde go in the same offseason after the sort of rock that you've built your church upon in the secondary for 5 years, you need to have a very solid replacement. I believe Cole Bishop is a great two-way player in terms of pass coverage and his ability to blitz off the edge. They get him out of Utah, and Kyle Willingham's great, an aggressive defense. Second round at pick 60. Dwayne Carter, interior defensive lineman from Duke, defensive tackle. Really, if you look at his previous year's tape, he was a top 20 lock. Then had a bit of a down year. A lot of people sort of cooled on him, forgot about him. I don't think he forgot how to be a good football player. It's, again, in terms of role and usage, he didn't have the greatest year. I'm sure everybody throughout the process talked to him about that. But if you go back and look into his second last year at Duke, like, the guy was a wrecker and has the potential to be a really penetrating, sort of dominating 3-tech that they could really use in that defense. Thought it was a great pick in the third round at pick 95 overall. They go and get Ray Davis, the running back out of Kentucky. Big play Ray, elite nickname, in the fourth round at 128. One of the best receiving backs in this draft, and that might be deceptive based on his size, is tremendously effective out on the edges, catching the ball, and then getting yak. Cedric Van Pram, the center from Georgia, who a lot of people thought was going to be gone before round 5, pick 141 when they got him. The previously mentioned Edouard Elfushio, the linebacker out of Washington, who was the best linebacker in zone pass coverage in all of CFB last year.
I would even say in man, he's pretty damn good too.
He's good in man, but in zone, he was elite last year. Top of the top, is going to fit into that Bills defense. Because of that, that's going to be the calling card he starts with. And then, like James Cook, build up the rest of his game and become a more complete player. We've seen that staff develop linebackers who, again, came in with one kind of strong calling card and then have become much better all-arounders. We think, again, it's a tremendous landing spot for him. And then Javon Solomon, one of your favorites, the edge out of Troy, absolute fireballer. They get him in the 5th round at 168. Again, top to bottom, there's not a weak pick in that draft.
No, there's nothing that I would consider like way off base.
Or reach.
You know, and again, the Solomon pick as just a fireball off the edge. Like, he's going to get 20, 25 snaps a game. He's going to be like their Josh Uche, right? Yep. It's third and long. Let's bring in Javon Solomon, because if there's one thing he does really well, it's rush off the edge. He's a shorter prospect, but he has length. Like 34 plus inch arms at a 6-foot frame means you get the small strike zone of being a smaller body. You have natural leverage, but you still have the length to get into a tackle's chest. It's a rare physical profile, but he's got it. And he's also really fluid, and he's got a good first step. Like, this kid's just born to rush the passer. Ulufosio, boy, I love him. And honestly, the only reason he fell is because he was an older prospect and he had an injury history. But he's great in coverage. I think he's really physical against the run, like way more physical than I think he gets given credit for. Like, people almost typecast him as like a one-dimensional type player. Like, I really don't think he is. Like, I really do think he's a 3-down player. And I just love that pick to get him in the 5th round. I want to talk about Cole Bishop. Is there a more Micah Hyde-ish safety in this class than Cole Bishop. I mean, talk about hand and glove fit.
Yeah, and it's funny because that's the pro Micah Hyde and the collegiate Cole Bishop, whereas if you were comparing him to the collegiate Micah Hyde, Cole Bishop is like clearly better.
As a prospect, Bishop was better than Micah coming out, and then Micah obviously developed into what he is. But
right, so if you're comparing again that developmental cycle of a guy that has played at an extremely high level in the pros, and saying this guy resembles him coming out of college right now, it's an extremely high compliment.
And with how much quarters this team plays, how much they put on their safeties plate to, handle receivers essentially one-on-one out in space, which is what you do when you're in quarters. Like safeties, got to do it. There's no help. You better be able to handle that post by yourself because you got nothing on the inside of you, right? You got to be able to handle run support from 12 yards deep. Sometimes we're going to have to put you down in the slot if we're doing a rotation at the snap where we got to go from a 2-high look to a 1-high look, and you're the guy that we're rolling down there to handle the slot when we go from 2x2 to 3x1. You better be able to handle two-way goes. He can do it. You better be able to blitz.
Yeah.
He can do it. He's a perfect fit for what they ask their safeties to do. And this team is hard to play safety for.
You have to do a lot.
You got to do a lot.
And the thing about Bishop that really impressed me on his tape was I try and go in without expectations, but both of the Utah safeties got drafted. One might end up being a running back, but that's a completely another story. I really thought based on that one of these guys is going to be typecast to deep. One of these guys is going to be typecast to playing in the box, near the line, in the slot, and they're going to specialize a little bit. And they didn't. And that's a rarity. It's a credit to Kyle Willingham and his defense. They were almost a 50-50 split in terms of when they either played short or played deep. They both played an almost equal amount. They both were effective rushing and passer in very similar metrics. For a very similar number of snaps, they had efficiencies, pressure numbers. They can both do it all. And that's when I really kind of went, I was 2/3 of the way through my study on both of them going, which one's which?
Yeah.
I was waiting to put this label on, this is the deep third guy.
And then one of them's in the backfield, and you're like, okay, yeah, gotcha.
And you're like, no, these labels don't apply. And that's like a perfect quarter safety.
Yeah.
Right? If he's great going forward, great in the deep, and it's a hard skill set to get. Not that many guys. We really liked Rabbit Taylor Demerson. He was another guy that had that flexibility to do both well. But they don't grow on trees. They're tough to get. And so I know some folks were thinking that the Cole Bishop pick was just a little bit early. I really don't think so. I think when people dig into his tape and certainly see how quickly he adapts, the college defense he came from, not easy. They put a lot on their plate there as well. So I think his sort of adaptation period is going to be shorter than a lot of rookies, even in a very complicated defense that asks a lot of its safeties like the Bills do. I think Bills fans are going to love Cole.
Yeah, just a great draft class. One they really needed. They needed it.
Had to hit it.
Had to hit it, and I think they did. Obviously, statistically unlikely that every pick is going to work out, but I think out of a lot of classes in the NFL this year, this is one of the ones that has a higher chance of a higher proportion of their picks hitting. I really love what they did. All right, let's get to thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs even. Basically our distillation of the report card from last year, where we have three options. Because we're basically just trying to say, did this team get better? Did they get worse? Or are they not the same, but did the additions cancel out the losses, and are we just going to call it a wash for where they are in 2024 relative to where we last saw them in 2023?
Right.
When it comes to the Bills, even with all of their losses, and there is a lot, I'm going to go with thumbs even. Because I feel like their additions cancel out those losses. Yep. As numerous and as important as they were. I think they did that well this offseason to mitigate that damage. Even if it's just treading water, treading water is a success when you lose that many good players, right? And they at least accomplished that. they didn't go backwards, which really means that they established a foundation where they can get back up off the mat after how last year ended. And that's really all they needed, was to not go backwards. And they accomplished that. So as far as I'm concerned, thumbs even, that's a win. That means this is a playoff team. They're going to be there in January. And when you got Josh Allen, like, you got a shot. But just a phenomenal offseason by them to roll with the punches and deliver some punches back.
Fully agree. I'm going to go with thumbs even as well, because they had a lot of change, especially in the wide receiver core and the secondary. We've talked at length about both, but they ended last year on a serious roll. Teams that do that tend to continue that into the next year. And yes, it is going to be a very different team. And before Bills fans jump up and down and say thumbs even, this is a team that finished first in the division. Mm-hmm. After everything that happened, they won their division. Thumbs even means we project them to win their division again.
Yeah,
like,
they're my
even
pick.
After all the change, like, they have that ability. And then, like you said, if they get into the postseason, they've got Josh Allen and a better than puncher's chance. I said earlier in the episode, I believe they're still in that championship window, which a lot of people, me included, thought they might fall out of. After all this, waiting until the draft, waiting until free agency was over, like, they did not fall out of that window. They're still there. They might be lower down. It might be a lesser chance, but it's not zero at all. They still have a chance to go all the way.
So, again, we didn't talk about this before the show. You and I are in agreement. AFC East runs through Buffalo still?
I think it's incredibly hard not to say that right now, given the makeup of the whole division. This is the last episode of this division, so we've talked about all the teams at this point, and seeing what each team did. They ended last year on top, as unlikely as that ended up being.
Despite their best efforts not to.
Yeah, despite everything they did to try and knock that off track, they still couldn't not finish first. I'm not betting against them.
That brings us to ceiling and floor then. Okay, so we think they're going to win the division, but what's their ceiling in wins and what's their floor in wins, which is a different conversation.
Yes.
Basically, if everything goes right, what do we think they could be? If everything goes wrong, what will they still be?
Yeah.
This is a very difficult schedule. Like, very, very difficult. And we're going to find out quick what they are with all this youth, right? Because they start with the Cardinals, Dolphins, Jags, Ravens, Texans, and Jets. That's the slate to start the season. Oh, but wait, there's more.
Don't say what you'd pay yet.
Back half of the year, Seattle, 49ers, Detroit, Rams, Chiefs, and the rest of their division games. They got 2 against that Patriots defense that we know is very talented as well. That's tough. That's a really,
a lot of good teams.
It's hard to handle the AFC, let alone you throw in the NFC West on top, which might end up being the best division in the NFC West, and they got to go through them too. So my ceiling, and this would be like, I don't want to say a miracle. It's going to be hard for them to do.
Unlikely.
Unlikely. My ceiling is 12. And if this Bills team goes through that schedule and wins 12 games, they're probably the 1 seed. That's how good they are, right? Yeah. I think a more realistic projection is probably 10 to 11, but still winning the division, because that is such a ridiculous schedule. But the floor for me is 9. So at minimum, if Josh Allen stays healthy, this is an above 500 team that will be in the mix for a wild card spot. And that's if everything goes wrong other than Josh getting hurt.
Yep.
But if Josh is healthy and they get a little bit more of a break on injury luck to their defense than they did last year, and if the young guys come along and Keon turns into what we think Keon can be, and Khalil Shakir is killing people, and James Cook is having a great year, that's a 12-win team, potentially a first seed. At minimum, they're competing with Kansas City and Baltimore for it, and they have an opportunity to do some real damage. Do I think overall, if I had to pick them versus Kansas City or versus Baltimore right now for winning the Super Bowl, would I give them as good of odds to win it as those 2 other teams? No. But it's Josh Allen, it's a good defense, and it's an offensive coordinator who, in my opinion, is calling a much better game than the one they had before. Right? He gets it. Yep. So it might end up being a significantly better team than last year. They just need to stay healthy.
I think this team is going to be underrated by a lot of people because of all the losses, because of the big name losses, because of the changeover, because of people didn't pay attention at the end of last year, because there are those folks out there that are not Bills watchers that are like, that team was junk at the beginning of the year. And, they got beat at the end of the year. They're not anything. And they lost all these players. And their schedule's tough once everybody starts looking at the schedule. I think a lot of people are going to be writing the Bills off, except for the Bills. Yeah. I think the Bills are going to be like, why not us? I feel like this is very much a why not us year for the Bills. Like, yeah, we had a lot of change, but every team is a new team in the NFL these days. There are very few teams that have a lot of continuity, and the ones that do don't tend to be that good. You need to keep moving to stay ahead of the curve. They've made changes to match that new identity, and I think they're going to be coming out strong and believing in their own cause. Is it a rough road to hoe? It is 100%. That schedule looks deadly on paper. We know that will change as the year goes on, but I'm going to say their ceiling is 13.
Oh, so you're even higher than I am.
I'm going to say that a lot of things have to go right. They have to gel quickly on both sides of the ball. They have a lot of young players. And look, if the passing game stumbles out of the gate, they're going to lean more on the running game, but they're going to lose some of those games because they're against tough opponents. So that would be, again, 13 is they come out firing, they come out believing. A couple of teams sort of look past them. They steal wins in the early season, get on a roll, and go, we're just as good as we were last year. We're very different, but we're just as good as we were last year. The floor for me is the same as you, 9. I can't see with this coaching staff, with all the talent they have, and with Josh, that they win less than 9 games.
I forgot to make this point earlier, by the way. People were clowning on them for like trading back and giving Xavier Worthy to the Chiefs and everything. Like, how could you trade with your biggest rival again? You already, you basically handed them Patrick Mahomes. Well, you did hand them Patrick Mahomes, and you handed them Trent McDuffie on a silver platter. How could you possibly make that trade to give them Xavier Worthy? Guys.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Mahomes is going to make it work whether Worthy's there or not. But B, and this is probably the most important part, I think Buffalo got the better receiver. Like, who cares? They got the better guy.
What killed me about that particular thing is, yes, there's storied history between these two teams, especially recently, and it's fun. Makes for good football in the NFL. Like, strong rivalries make for really good games in the NFL, and there is a strong rivalry between Buffalo and Kansas City at this point. Insert 5 other receivers here for Kansas City. You think Pat's not going to make them work? You think Andy Reid's not going to make them work? Like, it doesn't matter that it was Worthy. It could have been 5 other receivers. I understand that it was Buffalo that did it, and that's what, really keyed people off. But I was like, honestly, does it matter who we're talking about here? It's like, oh, you gave them. It doesn't matter who you give them. Pat's going to make it work. Like, lay off. And I'm with you.
I would have been more scared of Keon going to Kansas City than Worthy, though, to be honest. Because what does Xavier Worthy do that they didn't already have Hollywood Brown to do?
Yeah.
Like, they don't have a Keon Coleman.
Yeah. They're doing with speed slots what Buffalo's doing with just slots.
Just all of them.
Like, all slots.
Yeah, 4 verts every play.
Right. So it was a funny storyline. Again, I think the rivalry makes for good football. We know we're friends with everybody from KCSN. Shout out to BJ and his crew. We're friends with lots of Bills podcasters as well. We get this one from both sides, and we just kind of sit back and watch. It's a lot of fun.
We just watch our friends fight.
That's right.
Every year.
That's right.
We love the toxicity. All right. Well, if you're a Bills fan and you're still here, thank you. If you live in the Florida Panhandle and you're still here.
What happened?
Thank you for getting to turn us off while you do dishes. We appreciate you all for watching this. I think this episode actually ended up being a lot longer than our normal ones, but It was fun. It's always fun to talk about, these kind of top 7 to 8 teams-ish, sure. Right? Especially when they have this much turnover and this much stuff to talk about. So, fun episode. We'll be back next week with the NFC East, and I think the Commanders are the first team that we're talking about next week. Talk about a lot of turnover, a lot of changes.
Yeah. They redefine turnover.
Yeah, so fun team to talk about. Endless storylines over there, and then we'll roll into the Giants and the Cowboys and the Eagles from there. So if you enjoyed this, we'll see you back next week. Also, make sure to check out our clothing partner, Homage. They have the NFL license, so if you want to get Bills gear or bootleg gear, woohoo! Either one works, honestly. Whatever you get from Homage, we get a cut of it if you get it from the link in the description below. So thank you to them. Thank you to our patrons. Thank you to our executive producers. Thank you to our editors for crushing this week. Jay, Autumn, Anthony, we love you guys.
Yep.
And we will see you all on Monday.